Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you could join us for this episode number 43. Thank you for tuning in and liking and subscribing on YouTube, listening to us on Google Play or iTunes or 93.9 in Louisville. Today, we're going to talk about horse racing and its perception around the world. We have a good friend of mine from France, Fanny Salmon, who literally travels the world. I think she's been to every major track at every corner of this planet talking about horse racing. And then we're going to talk to a guy who's a great journalist, a wonderful storyteller. He is not a horse racing guy, although he is a multiple award-winning anchor for the NBC affiliate in St. Louis. Frank Cusumano will join us to give his take on horse racing, which has gone through just a terrible year. As we all know, we're not here to keep beating it up, but maybe get some insight from Fanny and from Frank as to what they see and what might be coming about in horse racing, because this certainly is the year for some introspective analysis of what's going on, and that's what a lot of the horse people are doing right now. They're sitting down, trying to figure it out. One of the biggest things still is trying to pinpoint exactly what went wrong at Santa Anita. Horses, medication, track. Was it a combination of all of it? Horses that perhaps should not be running, not just at Santa Anita, but other tracks that maybe, trying to get one more race out of them instead of giving them a little bit of a layoff or simply retiring them. These are all questions, and there's no answers exactly about that. For example, as Mr. Thomas Kenny joins us again this week, and we have back on lead guitar, Scott Hall, on
Hello.
percussion, Ben Chaffins.
How's it going?
Good, gentlemen. Dale Earnhardt, the tragedy of the 2001 down in Daytona, a legend. Probably the most famous NASCAR guy, stock car guy ever was Dale Earnhardt. And, you still see the number 3. People will still be wearing his shirts and his caps.
You ever seen the special edition Monte Carlos they put out?
Yes. Yes, I actually have seen that. And you're the car guy, but I have seen that. But, when Earnhardt's death, after the mourning period and everybody upset and stunned, as they should be, trying to make something positive out of it was NASCAR. And they did that with a device that was not mandatory prior to that, Thomas.
It's called the Hans device. Head and neck safety is what that stands for. Basically, it's a big sort of L-shaped piece of the harness that would go around your neck and up the back of your head. And Dale Earnhardt didn't wear it. It was available at the time he was racing, but he didn't wear it because he thought it was uncomfortable and restrictive.
Yeah, probably a lot of several drivers, I would guess, probably didn't at that
He probably wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
But after, the tragic events of the 2001 Daytona 500, there was a lot of rumors floating around, like, was it a seatbelt failure or, this, that, and the other. But at the bottom line was he wasn't wearing a Hans device, and NASCAR made that mandatory after the events of 2001.
And so they took proactive measures, and we're seeing that with football. With all the concussion controversy in the last few years, now guys get a concussion, they're going out of the game, they're being looked at again, they continue to try to improve the helmet safety. And the whole point is that the major sports have to do that. You have to take action, or else you're gonna be taking steps backwards if nothing changes.
That's right.
Horse racing, do you have any idea what's going on? Scott and Ben, do you have any idea what's caused such a mess with this and since the tragedy of so many dead horses this year?
No, I can't say I do. I can't put my finger on just one thing, Kenny, other than it brings to light the issues we've talked about over the year, which is, there needs to be one governing body. I think it boils down to that. Like, how do you fix it now?
Yeah, I think that might be the thing that comes of it. I hope they keep the politics out of it. Politicians get involved. They'll have a bunch of hearings in Washington. I don't care which party you're for. They'll have a bunch of hearings in Washington. They'll ask the questions, why is this happening?
That's the important thing. You have to self-regulate.
Yeah.
To such an extent to where the outside government doesn't need to get involved.
I think so, and I believe that could be, if there is a positive to come out of this year, I believe that will be it, that if they don't have a commissioner, and I don't think they will, Mike Rapoli was very eloquent last week in talking to us about the need for that. If they don't have a commissioner, and I don't think that's ever going to happen, maybe they can get enough of these veterinarians and track officials together and some of the prominent trainers that know about the day-in, day-out workings of a racetrack and come together and form some kind of let's say, de facto commissioner with one, one head and a bunch of tentacles. Well, tentacles didn't sound right, did it? a lot of little legs carrying one big head. No, seriously, they need to get that. They need to come up with at least have a body that will get together and try to have something that works in California and Arkansas and Louisiana and Florida and Maryland, Kentucky, New York. It's got to happen. Anyway, we don't know all the answers. Fanny Salmon and Frank Cusumano may have some answers for us. Fanny is up next when we come back here on the Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Thank you for tuning in again this week. We are downloaded in 22 countries. I think I know one person in France that might download us.
I do.
A longtime friend of mine, Fanny Salmon. Welcome to the show. I feel like I start saying welcome back because I see you at racetracks all over the place, including just a couple of weeks ago at the Breeders' Cup. So thank you for coming in.
Well, it's great to be back. And Kentucky is home to me, too. It's my second home. And I never feel good if I'm not in Kentucky for too long. And it's always a pleasure to be back. And it's a pleasure to be here with you. I've been listening to the show. Yes, I do listen to the show from France. I've listened to it in Dubai and in other countries. You've been a great travel companion.
Well, thank you. And we worked together in Lexington.
Yes, back in the days.
Years ago, we would get up in the mornings and drive up to the Kentucky Derby and be there all day and then drive back and do the newscasts and then drive back up the next day, 3 or 4 of us.
And edit stories after the newscast, which was so much fun. And every year, Kenny, you would tell me, this is my last Derby, Fanny. And every year, there'd be another one.
I've been saying that for a long time, haven't I? I said, I can't keep doing this.
I do remember the general manager, or was it I think the general manager showing up and saying, "What's this I hear about this Derby special that everybody wants to advertise in?" I think he had no idea what you were doing behind the scenes.
When people would come in, they did not understand the magnitude of the Derby. And, of course, it's even grown more then. Back when we were covering it in the 90s, it was fairly laid back compared to now in terms of the media coverage. And I know you come over for it every year. And what is the Derby, Kentucky Derby compared to for like the ARC Day, the ARC that you cover, or some of the other big races that you cover? Because Fanny is an international horse racing reporter, broadcaster, and she's getting ready to go to Japan. She's been to Hong Kong, all throughout Europe, all throughout the U.S. So with all those qualifications, how does the Derby compare to the Arc de Triomphe for someone, some other race like this?
Well, I think if you had to compare it to another racing event, it would probably be the Melbourne Cup because of the national attention it attracts. And probably also the Galway racing, although Galway in Ireland is far less, it's smaller and the prize money is not the same. But there's an carnival atmosphere to it. And I remember the first time I went to the Kentucky Derby, you said, "Fanny, young woman of your virtue should not be left alone in the infield after 10 a.m. And it's actually, it's very interesting to cover the infield in the Kentucky Derby. And to a certain extent, that's why it reminds me of the Melbourne Cup Carnival and the crack that the Irish can have at Galway.
Did I give you good advice on that Derby infield, by the way?
Yes, well, I'm French, so I can manage. But no, that's true. I mean, it's not what you would expect to see at some of the other race meetings around the world, that's for sure. But it's fun. It is a lot of fun, and people do enjoy going to the races, and that's what makes it special. And everybody in Kentucky and elsewhere, if you talk about horse racing, they will say, "Have you been to the Kentucky Derby?" Whereas the ARC weekend would be more for racing enthusiasts who are looking at the lines. And it's a bit more like the Breeders' Cup, where you have great races. There's the ARC, of course, but you have the Prix de l'Opera. You have many other races that people are targeting year-round.
Talking with Fanny Salmon, who is an international reporter for various outlets of horse racing. I see you all over the place. I pop that on TVG. I see you on Sky. I don't know. What have you missed? You're everywhere.
Well, I've been working with the sales company Arcana in France, which happens to be right next to the house that my great-grandfather built, and that I bought from my grandparents after they passed away, unfortunately. But it's a lot of fun because it's going back to the roots. When I was a teenager, I only dreamed of of being able to travel to the races. My grandparents were teachers. They came to Deauville when they were yearlings, and that's what people growing up there would go to the races, and they took me there. But I never imagined. I took a fancy to it very early on because it's an exciting sport. I never imagined that it would make me travel. And my teenage crisis was a horse named Triptych.
Triptych, yeah.
Who ran in the Breeders' Cup, and she was twice third in the Arc. She beat the boys in the Guineas in Ireland. But she was up for sale one day after her owner ran into a bit of trouble on the stock market, Alan Clore. And she was sold in a very special sale. It was a triplex. And we're talking 88, I think. And they were selling in Lexington, in Kildare, Ireland, and in Deauville, 3 sister cities, by the way. And my grandfather took me there. I was a teenager, and the whole atmosphere. Nobody was talking by the time she made it to the ring. And after she was sold for a record price in French records, my grandfather took me to Longchamp for the first time to see her. And I remember. After that, she also ran in the Arc, and I remember seeing her disappear after her third run in the Arc, thinking, back then I couldn't go to the stables.
Right.
It wasn't even possible. And I said, one day I will go to Kentucky and I will see you. And I made it to Kentucky. She wasn't around anymore. But now, when they give me my pass and I walk into the stable area on Arc Day, I think of her and how blessed, how grateful I am that this sport has given me so much and given me the chance to travel and meet incredible people, witness incredible horses, and live tremendous experiences.
And Fanny, as far as the racing here in the U.S. compared to Europe, you mentioned Australia, the Far East. Is there a thread that runs through there? Other than obviously you got gambling and you want to have a winner, you got winners and losers, but is there some kind of common theme that you've noticed, or is there really a lot of noticeable differences?
I remember a discussion I had with Richard Duchossois once in Arlington, and he said the thoroughbred is a common language. We can speak different languages, we can be in different places. People who have a true love for the thoroughbred, even with their hands, they will be able to understand one another because we have this in common. It's a common thread.
Right.
And you will find, you will meet with people from Japan. I remember being in Dubai soon after the tsunami hit. And I'd never seen a community get together like this. And when I say community, it wasn't about countries. It was about horse people feeling for one another. And the Japanese had actually been traveling while the tsunami had hit, and when they arrived, they didn't know, they hadn't heard from their loved ones, and everybody was pulling together. We only knew a few words of Japanese, but Kitsunai, like the human bond, and it's something I will always remember. And when Victoire Pisa won the Dubai World Cup that day, it was the whole racetrack was pulling for them. Sometimes, especially in the climate these days, where people are trying to maybe be more self-centered and within themselves, to be reminded that we have a lot in common with people who may not look like us, but we can share the same feelings and same experiences, and that's what I find magic in our racing world.
Does Fanny Salmon have a favorite racetrack around the country, around the world?
Around the country?
Around the world. I started to say around the country. Well, that would be probably like Keeneland because you're back in Kentucky.
Yeah,
Keeneland.
Keeneland. Of course, Keeneland, and I'm a adopted Lexingtonian. You know, and it's.
You even root for the Wildcats.
Of course, I do.
I'll see your picture sometime. You'll be in France. My friend Fanny Salmon here. We go back years. You'll be in France. We're like this UK outfit. Cheering for a game that's coming on I'm trying to do the 6-hour time difference.
France is easy. Try Singapore.
Yeah, I've seen you. That's right. You were in Singapore with like a 13-hour difference or something?
Yes, and in Dubai too. I mean, there were some times when there was a watching party with Andrew Chesser and Amanda Duckworth, you might know them, and Sean Feld, and I think we woke up the whole crowd of the hotel watching the Wildcats beat Notre Dame. That day, and I've cut short some winning parties to just be able to make sure that I can.
What did we
watch the
do to
cats.
you when you stopped through Kentucky? What
Well,
have we done to change you?
I have to say, the first year I thought people were crazy here. You know, Christmas wreath with colors and the whole city dressing blue and white. But I'm one of the crazies now, and I'm proud of it.
You know, and that is a passion that I think horse racing could try to, if they could capture it in other little parts where you'd have like cheering interest, even if you root against, say, your
Yes.
Wildcats or something, at least there's some cheering out there. And I think the human element is something missing in racing. You know, you'll root for Todd Pletcher, you'll root against him. And you know, Todd's great, and I think that's what you want. You'll root for John Calipari or against him, and that creates the passion that creates the interest.
And it's the pump-up videos. You know, we're talking blue and white. I have to talk about Goldie Kova because I
Kova.
followed her for so many years. I was so lucky that the team let me do that, made documentaries. But my sister, when I first told her about Goldie Kova, she went, "Oh, come on, not again. Last year it was Arcava or See the Stars.
Right.
Every year you come with a horse, and this one has 2 ears, a mane and a tail like everybody else." By the time Goldie Kova was running in her 4th Breeders' Cup, my sister actually was here.
Yeah.
I saw her. I didn't see her prepare because I was working with HRTV and the World Feed team. She showed up in Goldie Kova's colors. I was like, who took over my sister's body? But this is, I think, you know, if we pump up, it's we've got to be allowed to be enthusiastic. And I think, you know, the gambling aspect is so important. It's actually funding our industry,
Right.
and we don't want to walk away from it. It's very important, but we need to allow room for these other stories that, you know, get you so excited that people will have dinner with you and they say, I'm never looking at racing the way I used to, just because of that dinner where you told us about horses. But to go back to your question, because I know we're going to be running out of time, about my favorite race courses around the world, I would have to talk about the 2 race courses in Deauville, because we're a very small city, 5,000 people, but we do have 2 race courses. Galway is very special. And there's one that's very close to my heart too, on the tiny island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. We're talking, you know, way out in the Indian Ocean. It's a 1.2 million people island.
Wow.
And horse racing is their national sport. And this, the atmosphere that you have on the Champ de Mars in the middle of the capital is incredible. And everybody's following it. I will show up at immigration and people will say, "Hi, Fanny, welcome back. And what's your tip on Saturday?" You know, it's very special.
We're talking with Fanny Salmon, an international correspondent covering racing all over the globe. I don't think anyone has covered more tracks, at least that I know, than Fanny, and we'll talk more with her when we come back on the Horse Racing Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for watching us on YouTube. To see Fanny Salmon, if nothing, look at it right there on YouTube if you can see that. Or if you're listening to us, iTunes, Google Play, 93.9. You know, we're proud of the show, that we've had fun and we've had interesting guests, and that's why I'm really thrilled, Fanny, when we saw each other not that long ago at the Breeders' Cup, that you were going to be in the area and we could have you on with us. Because I think it's important to get different perspectives. One of them, as we know we're going through right now in the U.S., is the whole medication issue and all the things at Santa Anita and what's causing what and what's the cause and effect of breeding and everything in between. So I'd like to get your take as someone that lives in France, has covered horse racing literally throughout
France
the world.
and Kentucky. I do spend
France
part
and
of the-
Kentucky, yes.
I don't want to lose my green card.
You're bilingual. You are. We would do this interview in French, but you know I'm a little rusty.
On peut, y a pas de problème.
Yeah, whatever you say. But anyway, you know me.
And now if I get in
Gerard Depardieu. Okay.
Depardieu.
Depardieu.
And how do you call that horse who used to run in the Triple Crown named after a French king?
Oh, Louis XIV.
Bravo.
Yeah.
See, after all these years, he remembers.
All these years, I remember Louis XIV, yes.
Louis XIV.
Okay, so now, the issue of medication. You know, we always hear, hey, oats water, that's the European way, and that they don't have the breakdowns and they don't have the trouble. Is that accurate enough?
Well, to be honest, the 0 accident factor doesn't happen. It doesn't exist in France. It doesn't exist in other sports. You know, I mean, we've seen ice skaters drop
Right.
dead from a heart attack. You know, the
Right.
0 accident factor does not happen. But do we have more accidents here in the U.S. than we have in other countries? The statistics say so. And you know, we had an accident in Europe on Arc Day. We had a filly who broke down,
Right.
but it's rare. It's so rare that that it's being more noticed. And I think that the huge difference, And I'm not saying that nobody's going to ever use drugs in Europe or in other countries, but being able to crack down on them means that you have a better feeling for how your horses are doing.
Right.
You know, I mean, we've been over this over and over again. Horses cannot come up to us and say, I'm not feeling good today. They can show us signs. But then if you give them bute and they're not feeling the pain as much, then the signs are going to be so minimal that you're going to miss some. And I think it's very important, and I really agree with what the Breeders' Cup has been doing and the vet checks and scratching horses when we're worried before the race. I think it's important, but we need to make sure that this is not a cosmetic aspect, and we're not just being hypocritical by saying we're going to take these horses out, but we need to make sure that the wear and tear doesn't happen ahead of time. And if the more natural the horses are, the easier it is to be able to keep the worst from happening. I remember I was with Freddie Head last year with Goldie Dream, and she's a filly that I've been seeing, you know, same trainer as Goldie Kova. I know that team a lot, and I love them. And she was never square in her life. She wasn't born square, and they scratched her. Just after Freddie had told me, and we'd watched her canter the day before, and she said, I've never had her this well. But to the eyes of an American vet who's so used to seeing horses trot a certain way with the certain help that they have most of the time, they've never seen a horse who's naturally not 100% right.
Right.
And I think we need to keep perspective on sometimes horses don't have to look precisely that way even for the sales. I mean, some of the horses that don't pass sales vet turn out to be great runners. But we need to make sure that the number one priority is horses first, and not, you know, not. I think it's changing a lot already. But I remember, decades ago, hearing the cost of doing business. That's the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
And we cannot. This is not acceptable. And if we go on with thinking some aspects of it are the cost of doing business, then this business is going to fold.
We had Mike Rapoli on last week, who always has an opinion. I think a very good one too. You know, we've talked, not everybody, but several of us have talked about this on the show before. And Mike made a point about, needing a commissioner here, or some kind of commission that takes care of all U.S. racing. Not the little kingdoms. Everybody's all over the place like they are. Kentucky versus California versus New York versus Florida versus whatever, Louisiana, whatever. Is it more unified in Europe, for example? I mean, even though you're going from not state to state, but country to country, and kind of at least more of a uniformity for what they want?
There is. I know Americans do not like to federate. Everything federal can be scary. There are more unifying bodies in Europe, but also there is an international horse racing federation with very clear standards and goals, and trying to make sure that the rules are the same everywhere. And I think it would be to everybody's benefit. Also for betting, but to make sure that the rules are the same everywhere. And the issue that we have here with racing risking its popularity, it's happening elsewhere as well. It's happening in Australia. It's happening even in France. And we need to make sure that we are able to show every aspect of the industry. Because many times, we need to focus on something. And the focus a lot on TV coverage, which is what I know, has been going back to betting and betting only. And it's very important. Betting
I
is
totally
important.
agree with
We
you on
need
this.
it.
I think
But
it's overemphasized.
But we need to make sure that there is room to tell the other stories, because otherwise people will think that our sport is only about people trying to make money. And they never hear about the many stories and the many people that I know who have slept with their horses in their stall when they're not doing well. Yeah. And this is a big part of our sport. I'm not saying that there are no crooks in the industry. You take every industry, you go to Wall Street, the percentages, you take 100 people in every game, country, community, you're going to have some bad apples. But most of the people I know feel the same as I do about horse racing. They're passionate, and they're passionate about the horses, and they want to put the horses first. And we need to make sure that this is an element that is carried through, and people realize that no, people in the horse business are not just here to use and abuse the horses.
And well put. And, that was always my drive, was to tell the stories, as it still is. And I think that's one of the reasons NBC gets a good number on his Triple Crown and Derby especially is that we tell a lot of the stories. Yeah, we cover the odds. You know what the odds are going to be.
And they're important.
We have our handicappers. We know what drives the sport, but what I think drives the casual guy out there, the guy sitting in middle America that watches 2-3 horse races a year maybe, is the story. Why do I like this horse? Why do I like this jockey, this trainer? And I hope that that's what we try to do with this show, as you know, is tell the stories and get the human element involved as well.
And it's the why should I care, you know.
Right.
When my sister was asking me about Goldikova, what's special about her, well, after 2 half-hour shows, she understood. and that's the thing, you know, you cover the Olympics, and these stories on the Olympic coverage are so important. You know, it's a sport that you don't know, and who cares? You just watch this feature, and you're not going to go for a restroom run because you want to make sure that you know what happens to this guy that you just found out about.
See, I say go to the loo here.
Okay. Yeah.
Fanny, I can't thank you enough for being on.
It's a pleasure.
And you'll be off to Japan soon and
I'm going
traveling the world again.
Back to France to the November sales, the autumn sales in Arcana, where we're going to sell some out of training horses and broodmares and prospects and horses for national hunt. And then I'm off to Japan, where actually we have a Frenchman, Christophe Lemaire, who's leading the jockey rankings. He was the champion last year, and we're hoping that he's going to do again this year. And,
Fanny, thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure, Kenny. À bientôt.
Fanny Salmon is with us, a great friend, international correspondent for horse racing, great ambassador for the sport as well. More coming up on the Horse Racing Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show, episode number 43. How it's gone by. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for liking and subscribing to us on YouTube, listening on Google Play and iTunes and 93.9 in Louisville. I love this guy. We've been great friends for a long time. Frank Cusumano, he has won multiple Emmy Awards. He has won Edward R. Murrow Awards. He is a sports journalist, the main anchor for KSDK TV in St. Louis, and a member of the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. And he has covered horse racing. That is certainly not his main beat, and that's why I want to get his perspective today. Welcome in, Frank Cusumano.
Kenny, great to be with you. You're still my favorite person from the state of Kentucky.
Well, thank you. I moved ahead of Patino a few years ago, didn't I?
Yeah, after the little scandal, and you've lived a really clean Christian life, I had to put you on top.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Well, now we go way back to when you were working in Lexington, so you have been around the Kentucky Derby and Keeneland. You have covered some horse racing, but basically at KSDK, where you win all these awards, you know, you're covering the Cardinals and the Blues and when the Rams used to be in town. So as far as horse racing, how much attention does Frank Cusumano pay to horse racing every year?
Well, to be honest with you, we have a track here in St. Louis, which has been around for a long time, called Fairmont. And I am there, I'd say, about once a month for about a 4 or 5 month stretch. It's an old track. It's got a great story tradition. They have a former jockey, David Gall, who won 7,000 races, so he was always an easy story. And just in the last, I'd say month and a half, where Illinois has gotten great news about the ability to bet, that now there's going to be an infusion of cash into that racetrack where it's going to basically turn into a sports book. And it'll be great, and I think it'll improve the quality of racing, the quality of horses, and I think it'll put Fairmont maybe, a little bit back more in the sports picture here in St. Louis.
And so, I mean, there's horse racing fans in that great city of St. Louis and in Missouri, as we know. As you mentioned, from your perspective this year, Frank, seeing all the things that's happened at Santa Anita, this has been the bleakest year in so many ways for horse racing, the controversial finish at the Derby. Do you think this has just been such a year that's going to be tough for horse racing to come back overall in a national perspective?
Well, it's a tough call because it is, ironic that it got the most coverage, it has in a long time for the negativity of it or the scandal of it. I do think it's one of these sports, Kenny, where you have to experience it firsthand to really appreciate it. I mean, I have to tell you that in my 6 or 7 years in Lexington, some of the best, you know, stories that I've covered and storytelling opportunities were at Churchill Downs Derby Week, or were at Keeneland when they had their racing seasons without the track announcer back in the really old days.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it, and I think journalists appreciate it because you're around, you know, we deal with pampered, spoiled brat professional athletes and general managers who don't want to tell you a thing. You know, let's face it, you know better than anybody, these jockeys and these trainers and some of these owners are characters who open up and tell great stories. I've always really just enjoyed the heck out of it. I just don't think, like in a market like St. Louis sometimes with these other sports, that, you know, people gravitate to the sport unless there's a scandal. Now, I work at the NBC affiliate here in St. Louis. And
Hey guys,
I know
I'm
that
so sorry to jump in. I got to jump in here. I apologize. We were getting a bad feedback on your line. Hold on one second.
Sure, take your time.
Yeah, sorry, Frank. Frank, there's some kind of feedback coming in on your channel there. Are you near some? It sounds electrical. Do you hear it, Kenny?
Yeah, I was hearing a little bit.
I'm so sorry to do that, but it got so
that's
bad
fine.
it
We
maxes
can
out.
start
We
off-
may have to pull back on that last question, Kenny. We're still rolling.
Yeah, start that
Okay.
question over. No problem
And
at all.
Frank, you sound clear right now, so I don't know if
I'm in a different spot, and I'll try to stay in
Gotcha.
this spot.
Yeah, it sounds awesome now. Sorry about that again, fellas. And Kenny, just pull back to the question, and I'll do a fade.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Frank, with this year being the problems at Santa Anita, well documented, even a controversial finish at the Kentucky Derby where I was waiting 22 minutes to see who the winner was. It's probably been it has been the bleakest year ever for horse racing. From a national standpoint, do you think this is something horse racing bounces back from this time around?
I actually do. And I do think that in a weird way, you get a little bit of a jolt out of it because it was so attention grabbing and so unique that it caused people to pay attention. Now, you probably couldn't do this every year, but I got to believe with what happened last year during the Triple Crown season, there's going to be a buzz, you know, heading into this year. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be devastating. You know, Kenny, as I mentioned before with you, is some of the best storytelling opportunities I've ever had in my career were trackside at Churchill Downs Derby Week or at Keeneland, you know, when the racing seasons were live. I just think that the characters, the openness of the trainers and the GMs and the jockeys are so much better than what we sometimes have in other professional sports. I think when people get a taste of it, especially the media, they love covering it.
And, you know, you mentioned that, and you're a wonderful storyteller. That's why you win all those Emmys and those Edward R. Murrow Awards. And, you know, with horse racing, as we've talked about before, not only the horse, but as we know, they got the trainer, the jockey, the owner, sometimes the groom, the breeder. There's several layers that you don't often find in other stories. You know, you got a manager, a coach, and a player, and maybe a story or two along those lines, but you can get about 4 or 5 stories sometimes out of one horse.
Absolutely. I always thought like the trainers were the equivalent of other people in professional sports. Like if D. Wayne Lucas was a basketball coach, he'd obviously be Bob Knight.
Mm-hmm.
If Nick Zito were a basketball coach, he'd probably be Rick Pitino. And these trainers were just so uninhibited and candid and just, you know, really giving. It just made for great stories.
You know, and about crossover in sports, we had Bill Parcells on, who is a horse owner. That's why he was on the show. Of course, you know, your friend of mine, Eddie Olczyk, I work with him at NBC, you know, hockey star and also a great handicapper. Eric Johnson is a guy that's in on the horses that he owns. The Vino Rosso connection that just won the Classic, the Breeders' Cup Classic. There's a hockey connection there with the Florida Panthers. So there's crossover with a lot of athletes that like horse racing, possibly because there's action. You know, they like that action if they don't know a lot about the sport itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, we were joking with Eddie Olczyk when Joel Quenneville, who won 3 Stanley Cups with the Chicago Blackhawks, took the Florida job. And a lot of people thought it was because the track was so close to the rink. Mike Shannon, who's our legendary broadcaster, who's in his 80s, I mean, he will miss Cardinal broadcast on Derby Saturday, and he's at Fairmont all the time. Jay Randolph, who I interned for at Channel 5, he still works at Fairmont here in St. Louis, and he just is addicted to the horses too.
Well, again, like you say, there's so many stories and so many characters, and characters in a good way. I mean, there's some very colorful dudes hanging around the racetrack.
You can say that again. There's no doubt about that.
It's like Damon Runyon still lives, Every week there's a Damon Runyon story at a racetrack.
With the exception of you, my all-time favorite reporter covering horse racing, this is a little bit before your time, was Nick from CNN.
Nick Charles, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the late Nick Charles. And I used to just love to turn on CNN Sports Tonight, Derby Week, and, watch his verbs come alive on television. And, there was nobody any better Derby Week telling stories than Nick.
And that's true. And I miss him, and it was fun. That's how we developed a friendship, was crossing paths at the horse race track. We're talking with Frank Cusumano, the multiple award-winning sports anchor for KSDK TV in St. Louis, and a great friend and always has great insight about sports overall. We'll continue this conversation about the perception of horse racing on the scene today when we come back here on the Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Glad that you tuned in, and delighted to have Frank Cusumano, a dear friend of mine for many years, the main anchor at KSDK TV in St. Louis in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. You're the first Missouri Sports Hall of Famer we've had on the show, Frank.
Well, I think the year that they voted, we had Italian judges, so that kind of helped.
And speaking of, how about this for just an unsolicited plug? When you're in the St. Louis area, eat at Chemo's.
Well, we appreciate that. We've been at it for 93 years, and we still have my grandma's red sauce recipes, and we're doing the best we can.
And if you follow Frank as I do, he also is a foodie. He does this, not just the sports thing, but he also goes around and tells you great places to eat.
Yeah, that's just a kind of a thing that I do to get free food, basically. So, but we enjoy the heck out of that. In fact, Kenny, I was at the Blues game the other night, and my wife Monique went to the restroom, and this woman comes to me and she says, "Oh, I know you. You're the food reviewer at Channel 5." And I said, "Okay, thanks."
Well, don't you love that when you make a mark like that after 20 plus years and all those awards on the sports desk?
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, that happens to me sometimes. They'll come up to me at a major race and they'll say, "Hey, you still doing that MMA stuff?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "You do horse racing too?" I said, "Yeah, how about that?" I've been doing that a little longer. I've covered, the Derby and a few big races, but thanks for noticing.
That's funny.
Is there any kind of correlation? You covered Super Bowls, World Series, Stanley Cups, big NCAA tournament games, basketball. Is there any correlation between being at a big event like that and being at the Kentucky Derby?
The only event that I would equate to the Kentucky Derby would be the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Where in addition to the hardcore, passionate, knowledgeable, fans in that particular sport, you also have kind of the lunatic fringe that are just there to get drunk and flash up their shirts, on the infield. But yeah, I think the Derby would be the only one in terms of that size and magnitude, and that varied of an audience.
Did you sit there and watch and wonder what the heck was going on at the Derby this year?
Oh my goodness. Was it 22 minutes? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think actually somebody put a watch on it that it was officially 21 minutes and 57 seconds. I said it felt like 21 hours. I mean, just to wait, and the rain's coming down. And I'm up there with Bill Mott, and he may or may not have won. And, down there, Nick Luck's down there with Jason Service, who may have won, looked like he'd won, but now may not have won. Yeah, so it was a long 21:57, Frank.
Yeah, there's never been a suspended sense of drama like that. I mean, in a World Series or an NFL, when they're getting a look at the replay, that'll last, 3-4 minutes max. But 22 minutes was amazing. And I'm always amazed at the way you, in this seemingly terrible torrential weather all the time, managed to navigate. I'm sure you've ruined some great shoes and slacks walking through that mud, but you don't miss a beat, and the rain is going, and you're just asking these cogent questions. I am so impressed.
You're very kind, my friend. I have to, because I still need the work, Otherwise, I'd come visit you. We'd go eat at Chemo's and watch it on a big screen or something. But,
That's right.
But you know how it is. It's the moment, and you know how you get caught up in a moment, no matter what sports you're covering, and especially, it's something big. I've never covered a Super Bowl. I've covered a lot of Final Fours. I've covered an All-Star game, not a World Series. But you know when you're there, and it's something that's special. And you don't have to explain yourself. They say, "What, do you cover horse racing?" Yeah. Have you ever covered the Derby? Yes, I covered 30-some Derbies. Then, they establish you don't have to explain what the Kentucky Derby is. So I guess maybe that's the kind of momentum that keeps all of us going through the snow and mud. And really the worst conditions I ever worked at are always Derby week.
Yeah, and I imagine, too, that there's got to be a moment, either right before or right afterwards, where you realize that you are actually talking to the United States. I mean, everybody watches the Derby. I mean, the ratings are still outstanding, no matter what you say about horse racing. Everybody watches the Derby. I don't get that feeling. We do local. I knew that everybody in St. Louis was watching our pregame coverage right before Game 7.
Right.
But it's a little different, one city as opposed to the entire country.
Well, that does cross my mind, and I talk to my family and I talk to you. I think about people that I know, and that's who I look at that camera and talk to. I really do, because it is. And, this year the ratings actually gained after the Derby. I guess people were calling their friends saying, whatever's going on in Kentucky, we've never seen anything like it before. Tune in, because our ratings actually got better during that almost 22 minutes span of figuring things out.
Well, and there's no way you could turn it off. I mean, they were just, you're going to all of a sudden not know who won?
Yeah.
Oh, it was great television. It was great drama.
Well, we mentioned, I said, for all the attention horse racing has gotten this year, and most of it has been negative, very few positive things, even with some great horses that we've had on the track this year. But at least they're getting attention, and maybe in the long run, that might be a good thing, especially if they do like car racing's had to do, like the NFL's had to do with concussions. If they address it and become transparent and try to move forward and spin that positively, I think that's a hope for horse racing.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can turn it into a positive. I agree with you 100%.
And it may take you to do it. I think I think that more people they get from outside that are sports journalists like you that, don't cover horse racing very much, but have knowledge of it. I think that's why I wanted you on the show today, to get that kind of feedback, Frank, because I do think it's time to get out of the box for horse racing and start looking more outside inward, because it's an insular sport.
Well, I mean, let's face it. You win a presidential election by getting the non-hardcore, supporters. You get the casual Republican or the casual Democrat, and you get a TV rating with that same, oftentimes like at 5 o'clock, we'll try to do something that sports-wise where I think maybe a housewife cooking a meal could be moderately interested. I probably don't want to go too heavy on wins above replacement of a baseball player at 5:22,
Right.
I want to do maybe the female marathon runner, or maybe some, light feature on some courageous young athlete. So yeah, that's the way to go. And I think with horse racing, if you were to, reach out to the local markets and to get, some of these sportscasters, to experience it, I think they'd get bit pretty easily by the bug.
And I think you've just summed it up. Once again, here only on the Horse Racing Show have we solved the problems of horse racing. That's what I try to do each week, Frank.
That's good stuff.
Hey, I can't thank you enough, my friend, for being on. And we'll catch back up, maybe Derby time or before. And how the Blues going to do this year?
Well, they've won 7 in a row. 5 of the last 7 have been in overtime. They lead the Western Conference in points. And everybody was anticipating a Stanley Cup hangover, and the Blues have not cooperated. They have not skipped a beat from last year's Stanley Cup. So it's an awesome team to cover.
Well, listen, I've always enjoyed your coverage and love the way you tell a story, and we got to catch up again.
Kenny, honored to be on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The award-winning journalist that is Frank Cusumano from KSDK-TV in St. Louis. We'll have more on the Horse Racing Show right after this. Welcome back. Just a few minutes to go here on the Horse Racing Show, episode 43. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to Fanny Salmon and to Frank Cusumano, our guest this week. We got the international's perspective. We got the national perspective from an award-winning sportscaster in St. Louis. I liked his idea, Frank's idea, about bringing in some of these affiliates around the country to come in and cover some of the Triple Crown or maybe the Breeders' Cup, or just be able to be around it and meet Bob Baffert or Todd Pletcher or Chad Brown, some of the people, Doug O'Neill, whoever the case may be, some big-time trainer, and see the everyday workings of a barn and see it's not just a bunch of rich guys that take a horse out there to run.
Yeah, there's definitely room in there for a really nice, editorial piece or.
Yeah. Because that's what it's going to take, I think, is to let people know, and we always said this, I'm not saying there's problems. There are problems. They can't always be identified. They're trying to do it. But the big thing is there's so many people that work on the backstretch of these tracks that this is their livelihood. And they're all not getting rich. They're making ends meet, very much blue-collar, hard jobs, long hours. And sometimes they get forgotten about when you just see that. Because it's easy to say, hey, that guy's got $1 million. He owns a horse. Why do I care? Sorry, the horse died, but he's still rich. And I can understand that. And that sounds cold, but that is the perception of a lot of people out there. PETA and some other organizations, they see that part of it. They don't see everybody else behind the scenes and the work involved and the care that the horses get. And that's why I think it'd be good to get more people. Just come and cover a story every now and then, because there's some good stories out there. And then we didn't get a chance to get into the video game controversy. Sorry.
It's all right. They'll come a better time.
You know what, Kenny, you're right, though. If you've ever been on the back, I've been lucky enough for me to be on the back side of a track and see the love that goes into those animals. No one sees that part, from the grooms guys on,
I mean, it's very much like your golden retriever. I mean, they love these horses like they would, your Siberian Husky Dakota.
Yeah. You don't get a job where you have to get up at 3 a.m. and obviously they love it.
Yeah. Well, it means so much to a lot of people, and again, I hope the biggest thing that comes out of this is they see some unity nationwide, and some tracks that have always kind of been opposing each other have kind of come together, and they got to figure out, is it breeding? That's another part of it. Are they just simply so closely bred now that they're not durable? And medication, I think, is a factor. I think track conditions sometimes it can be a factor. More questions than answers. Hopefully the more answers will be coming out within the next year. And hopefully you'll be back with us again next week when we'll talk more in episode 44. Thanks to Scott Hall, Ben Chaffins, and Mr. Thomas Kenny. I'm Kenny Rice, and we'll talk again next week. Thanks, everyone.